Welcome to a new episode of the Riyadh podcast. I'm your host, Merissa Khurma, Director of the Middle East Program here at the Wilson Center. Today's guest is Jordan's former Minister of Youth, a leading expert on political, economic, as well as security issues in the MENA region, but particularly Jordan, Dr. Faris Braizat. His company, Nama Strategic Solutions, very often conducts polling on all the socioeconomic and sociopolitical issues in the region. We're truly delighted to have you here with us today, Faris, to discuss youth, entrepreneurship, but particularly education, as that is the theme we're focusing on this month.
Thank you for hosting me.
So, Faris, I have, I guess the first question is, given that you conduct a lot of polls and you also served as Jordan's Minister of Youth, where are youth in terms of the workforce, the education system? I mean, the region suffers one of the highest youth unemployment rates in the world. How do young people feel about that?
Thank you, Merissa, for hosting me, and it's a pleasure to be talking to you about this very important topic. Youth are at a disadvantage across the MENA region because of job opportunities are very little compared to the abundance of supply of labor that is out there. Unfortunately, today with the economic slowdown in the global economy, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the recovery that is taking place now is not up to standards where you can reduce the unemployment rates. However, youth across the region, Jordan in particular, are suffering from the issue of unemployment. The most important probably figure that we can talk about is the national unemployment in Jordan is around 23.7%. Around 50% of the youth who are under 30, between 15 to 30, who are in the labor market, willing to work, and they have the actively searching for jobs. It's around 50% of them are unemployed, and even among those who hold a university degree, the unemployment rate is higher, especially among the females. And this is very challenging because this is a human capital. A human capital is not being utilized in the best way possible, and the potential is not realized. Their potential is not realized. Today, there are many programs in Jordan to jumpstart the process of entrepreneurship. And it was actually established back in the year 2000 when His Majesty King Abdullah started REACH program in order to encourage Jordanians to get into the IT sector. And that delivered great results until now. Jordan is one of the biggest producers of Arabic content online, and it is one of the biggest exporters of high-tech experts like programmers and IT engineers to the region and globally. And it has become a destination for outsourcing from different companies that they set their back office in Jordan. Just to be clear, during my service in government as a minister of youth, I worked on the national youth strategy, which was already developed before I joined the government, and then I continued to work on that. One of the items that was in need of acceleration was economic empowerment and entrepreneurship. So we started, it's a fourth pillar of the National Youth Strategy. We worked on that, and we launched the National Youth Entrepreneurship Forum. And we already, during my term and after, over 6 editions of that have been implemented. During the pandemic, we implemented, before the pandemic, we implemented one on various sectors, and it was a great success. 9 companies were awarded as a result, which are all young entrepreneurs, people working on the. Sorry, this is an interruption. So basically, the entrepreneurship program by the Ministry of Youth is already underway. Now there's a new program between the World Bank and the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of Digital Economy, and it's quite a big program, over 100 million US dollar, to encourage entrepreneurship, especially in the IT the IT and the ICT sectors. So there is the potential is there. We need to do more investment in that, and I think one of the biggest challenges that we still need to deal with is to do the upskilling and reskilling for the various sectors, including the public sector employees. The public sector is oversaturated with employment, so there's an overemployment there, and in order for that unemployment to be turned into more useful human resources, it will have to be we will have to change the way it is structured in terms of reskilling, upskilling, and exit. Today, we need, in order for exits to be realizable, we have to increase investment in the private sector, where we expand the private sector to the extent that it would absorb extra labor from the public sector that is already upskilled and reskilled. One of the sectors that are very promising in that regard is the tourism sector. Today, Jordan, in the first quarter of this year, actually surpassed expectations in terms of bookings and visitors coming to Jordan, which is a very promising return of the Jordan tourism sector. And that requires, one of the issues that we are facing today is the skilled labor and hospitality. That requires intervention in order to build not only a strategy, but also more practical programs where students and potential laborers in that market would have a good training and a good opportunity to work in the sector.
So thank you. This was a really great overview, especially of the fact that Jordan actually has a national youth strategy, of which entrepreneurship is a part. You mentioned the importance of skilling, reskilling, and upskilling. And I was wondering who you think should actually take the lead on those issues. Is it sort of a challenge within the education system? Is it something that higher educational institutions should undertake? Is it the private sector? Is it a combination?
Actually, it's a multifaceted approach, and it will have to be multi-institutional, multidimensional. And this means it is not only the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Higher Education or the technical and vocational training centers by the Ministry of Labor who are supposed to do that. Those are very important pillars, institutions that should deliver such services. But this is a national ecosystem where every single institution will have to contribute where it can contribute. I'll just give you one example. For example, in the hospitality sector, today there is the private sector. There are some specialty institutions that are highly specialized in the hospitality training. But still, despite the education they do, we still lack the necessary resources to be employed in the sector for two reasons. One reason is that the good skilled labor is being taken out of Jordan to Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries. And those who are well trained to serve in the Jordanian tourism sector, they tend to change jobs very frequently because of lack of job security. That includes social security and health insurance. And if those issues are fixed, and I think we have managed to do quite a lot of that during the pandemic, and the social security in collaboration with the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Labor, and other related institutions, they are including everyone in the social security umbrella, which would improve their chances, and it would improve the attractiveness of the sector for more people to join the labor force in that sector.
So you mentioned with regards to the skilling and reskilling that it's a multifaceted approach. It's really an ecosystem in itself that has to be part of that solution. And then the challenge of the job security element, which is why I guess so many young people, and this came up in our research as well, in the region, but also this applies to Jordan, prefer the public sector. So, what does the data tell you about preferences when it comes to public versus private sector? And what are the private sector jobs that youth are interested in?
First of all, let me make very clear that I totally believe in competitive education and competitive labor market and competitive skill set. And I think this is the only way that we can make sure that everyone is realizing his or her potential in the labor market. Second, I think one of the most important issues we need to address today is the job for life issue in the public sector. Today, it's a very difficult process if you want to fire any public sector employee, and it is next to impossible to do that. I think, and also there isn't a good process of evaluation, monitoring and evaluation, and performance evaluation of employees. That's why, in addition, public sector employees, they do have public health insurance and retirement through the Social Security now. And that would make the jobs in the public sector more attractive. Today, our polling data shows that more people prefer to work in the public sector than in the private sector, whether it's the job for themselves or any of their family members. And the reason is what I mentioned earlier. However, still in the private sector, if you have a good skill set, you are more competitive. You can find a better job, a well-paying job in the private sector, where your skill set will be rewarded both financially and in terms of positions. Unfortunately, with the way the public sector has been performing, still there is a lot to be done in order to reform the public sector, and that requires very serious surgical interventions in order first to do the reskilling and the upskilling of the public sector workers, and to find the new employment for the overemployed in the public sector. And that requires, the first thing we need to make sure that it's available is the expansion of the private sector. And that also requires certain surgical interventions, public policy interventions, such as reducing the cost of energy, reducing the cost of water, reducing the cost of business, including the bureaucratic procedures in terms of money and time, and also reducing the interest rate. And if that is not a possibility because the Jordanian dinar is pegged to the dollar, then we need to find the new ways where we can give easier access to finance for the private sector to excel and to expand. So it becomes its capacity to employ new people, whether they are coming from the public sector or newcomers to the labor market, is expanded.
Thank you, Faris. Yeah, this is truly a comprehensive look at how the public and private sector has to work together to address some of these challenges. With regards to employing more youth in the private sector, as well as making it easier to actually create jobs in the market. One of the challenges that many young entrepreneurs talked about on this podcast was access to capital, which you've addressed a little bit, but also access to markets. They don't know how to access markets in the region or even in Europe, or even utilize the free trade agreement between Jordan and the United States. So how can you help support particularly young entrepreneurs, to access markets for their products and for their services?
I think the first thing that will have to be addressed in that regard is education, consumer education, and entrepreneurship education. Today, you have a lot of people who come up with the great ideas. I'll just give you one example, anecdotal example. The first forum that I created when I was at the ministry, the entrepreneurship forum, was we have 511 applicants sending their ideas to the forum. We've selected around 50 of them, and those who included in the final round, around 30, and 9 of those were awarded. Now, they have very different stages of evolution. The ideation phase, there is a lot of work to be done on the ideation phase, and then the scaling from ideation to implementation, and what it takes in terms of pre-seed funding, seed funding, and then the series A, B, C, D, etc., until they get fully up and running and operational. Now, one of the things that we discovered in that session or in that forum, we gave the shortlisted 1 week of intensive training on what does it mean to do market study, market competition, access to markets, competition in targeted markets. What does accounting mean? How do you do accounting for a young company? How do you raise funds? How do you keep the books? How do you deal with the banks, etc.? And we discovered that many of those applicants, they either changed their idea after knowing some basic information about how an entrepreneur should operate, or they pulled out because they thought they are not ready to go there yet. Now, I think what is needed is to repeat the same thing at the national level and have people apply or share their ideas and how they want to go about those ideas, and then handhold those people from their basic knowledge into the more advanced knowledge where they need to penetrate markets, and they have to be skilled also with the ways and the strategies for market penetration. Now, that requires an investment, and I think the investment is already there. Today, we have many programs in Jordan running by the government and the private sector, including the VCs, the venture capital, and other funds available to invest in young companies and startups. All of them, they are trying very hard to improve that educational set of skills for entrepreneurs to excel and move forward and upward.
Absolutely. And we've spoken to some of the incubators as well as accelerators. So when it comes to the government's role, particularly as a regulator, and in drafting the necessary legislation in order to ease the process of basically business making, making it easier to register a company, making it easier to export, etc., or import material, etc. Some of the entrepreneurs we talked to basically talked about the challenge of explaining sometimes why certain regulations will completely kill the sector that they're working in, and how the government sometimes comes in, slaps regulations without really understanding the technology that's being used or why it's the sort of the way for the future. And part of it perhaps is that legislators and some government officials or the public sector in general needs to better understand some of these new emerging sectors, particularly in ICT. How do you address that? You were in the government before. If you are youth minister again, how would you address that?
I think the first thing to do is to look at the overregulation. I do believe that we are, as a country, we are over-regulating everything. In every sector, we are over-regulated. And I believe in principle, as a philosophy, we have to have a smaller yet more efficient government. The fact that we have an
Mm-hmm.
overemployment in the government, every single employee will have to find work for himself or herself. And that means
Mm-hmm.
complicating procedures unnecessarily. We have seen that. And I think in order to address this issue, the first thing that will have to be dealt with is the size of the public sector. It's too big, too inefficient, and it will have to be addressed accordingly. That is number one of the, and then you need to reduce the personal interaction between investors and bureaucracy. And make it automated. I think automation is going to reduce a lot of the effort, and it will save a lot of time for both the investors and the government. And the
Mm-hmm.
third element is basically we need to make sure that the overall regulations that are implemented are simplified, because what we have seen today, we have probably over anywhere between 700 or a little more regulations that you have to deal with as an investor in different entities, different places. Everyone would regulate for their own purposes. And I think this is the relatedness or overlapping, to be more accurate, between these different regulatories and different institutions and different regulations. It makes life difficult for investors, because in order to access the system, first of all, you need to identify the access point. Which one? Is it the investment commission, the investment ministry, or the Ministry of Trade and Industry, or the municipality where you want to start the project, or a development zone? Or so that is, I think,
Yeah.
lack of clarity is very important. It will have to be
Mm-hmm.
clearly and simplified. And the
Mm-hmm.
processes and procedures, they will have to be streamlined and made very, very simple. Um, Without that, we'll continue to push investors out. And
Mm-hmm.
today we have seen over the past 5 years, more Jordanian investors, they have deserted Jordan, either totally or partially, and they started their businesses in Saudi Arabia or Egypt or the Emirates or Turkey, because of cheaper energy, cheaper water, free access to land, and bigger markets, and better purchasing power parity. So we are
Mm-hmm.
in a good shape to compete in terms of knowledge and skills, but we are not in that good shape in terms of the environment in which investors operate. Of course, there is more education to be done on access to global markets, especially where we have FTAs, such as with the one with the United
Mm-hmm.
States, the ASEAN countries, and the European Union. I think
Mm-hmm.
we stand out as a country in these relations with over 1 billion consumers markets, but still those are not utilized properly, and we do hope that in the next couple of years more work on those to be done, and implementation will be the name of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. So Faris, if you had an opportunity to um, uh, go back to the government, and someone gave you a magic wand to change one thing that would really unlock the potential that you're talking about, what is that one thing you would do with that magic wand?
um, Smaller, more efficient government, get
Mm,
out of private sector's way, enable the private sector to excel based on competition. That's a philosophy.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's a guiding philosophy.
In
It's
terms of
also been
action,
part of the discourse. Yeah,
yeah,
in
in
terms of
terms of
action, please go ahead.
actions, there are many sectors that you need to go very detailed. I'll just give you one example about the tourism sector. You have to propel the sector to move forward, because it employs a lot of people. In 2019, the tourism sector employed 55,000 Jordanians, and each job in the tourism sector influenced positively, or had a direct impact on five other jobs on five other sectors. The tourism sector
Mm-hmm.
managed to get into the economy 4.1 billion in tourism receipts. Now that sector is the potential is huge. One of the things that will have to be done today, a lot of issues have been addressed. For example, access to Jordan is very simple, and it's easy now. Whether the conventional air carriers or the low-cost carriers, things are getting much better than they were 10 years ago. Today, what we need is to fix the sites themselves to make them more hospitable and visitor ready, and also improve the transportation systems within these touristic sites. For example, if you want to propel the sector in terms of ease of movement, you can divide it into 3 or 4 areas. Like in the north, you need buses to move from Jarash to Ajloun to Qais, and probably go to Mafraq, Al Jumal, other places on a regular basis. Like every 1 or 2 hours, a bus would go on that tour. Madaba is the same. Then the south, like Karak, Tafila, Dana Reserve, Shobak, Petra, and then you have Aqaba, Wadi Ram, along with Petra. So these are, and Wadi Araba, including Al Bahr Al Mayyit and the Madaba tour, where you can have the baptism site, the Dead Sea, Mount Nebo, Macarius or Mkawar, and the St. George Church and Al Rasas. All these areas, they need better connectivity in terms of easier transportation. And that can be part of the Jordan Pass and all of that. So this is only one example where you really can make a difference. And it will be filled very fast.
And that's again, like you mentioned earlier, a very important sector for Jordan, and has traditionally contributed a very large percentage of the country's GDP. So we are going to wrap this up, I guess, with your words of wisdom to young Jordanians and other youth from the region who are thinking about starting their own business and maybe a little bit hesitant. What would you tell them? What advice would you give?
I always use the word fail. Fail, it means first attempt in learning. So if you fail the first time and the second time and the third time and the 10th time, keep trying, because that is, you keep learning. And as you keep learning, you keep growing and you keep improving. You have to be perseverant. Perseverance is the way to go, and persistent. Don't give up. Keep trying. Everyone, falls and fails, but you have to get up and you have to move on. Thinking of many examples where people who came from very underprivileged background like myself, we kept fighting and doing whatever we can. We failed so many times. We fell so many times, and that did not prevent us from continuing to pursue our aims and goals. And today, I think if you continue to push your capacity and to push yourself forward, nothing can stop you.
Thank you so much for your words of wisdom and for this very enriching discussion, Dr. Faris Braizat, and hope to continue the discussion in Amman or in your hometown of Madaba.
Thank you very much. You're more than welcome anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This podcast is funded by a grant from the United States Department of State. The opinions, findings, and conclusions of this podcast are those of our guests and do not necessarily reflect those of the United States Department of State.